He's already here.
Oh, crap.
That's not good. Oh no. Bugaboo did run.
Yeah, I did.
Bugaboo said, I don't want anything to do with the inspector. Which is funny because he slept through his last visit.
He wants back inside.
He does, he's hungry. Well guys, we passed our inspection. It feels really good. Not necessarily because we passed, if you know what I mean. It's because it's kind of validation. It takes me back to when I went for my check ride as a private pilot. The check examiner said, I'm not here to teach you, I'm here to validate what you've already been taught. And I kind of feel like that's what the inspector was helping us to do, was to make sure that we're building our home correctly. Of course, he can't really tell us how to do it, right? He's not here to teach. Although, as a part of the conversation, I think instruction is very natural because we're just the kind of people who ask why. And we don't just take orders, we want to know what the reasoning is behind it. Problem is, we got here just as the inspector did, even though we made our very best efforts. We actually traveled out of town overnight to get the GFI breakers that I forgot, and he beat us here. He was very reasonable. He saw that we already had the breakers and he agreed that if we could just get those installed, he was fine to pass the inspection. Also, he taught me something about bonding a ground wire that makes a lot of sense, and I think when he originally explained it I didn't understand what he was trying to say, and now that I know, it's way more simple. So let's work together. We've got to get these things done, and then technically we're through our very first partial rough-in inspection and we're okay to cover up all of this electrical and move on with our lives. So the first thing that we failed for, again, was this little grounding wire. You might recall that in order to be prepared for our inspection, we needed to ground this box, and we also needed to bond all the grounds. The code states that there has to be one ground per chase, or whatever language you want to use. So there's a ground wire present in each one of these, but because we have this flexible conduit going up to the water heater, we don't need all three going up. And because it's so tight inside here, you don't really want to run all those grounds up. So we cut them in the box, all three, and then we ran one inside here, which is good, except for we hadn't bonded the box, and that's what we had failed for. So at the local electrical supply, they have these little pigtail ground wires. They meet the code because they're a green insulated wire, although it doesn't have to be green and it doesn't have to be insulated. It can be bare or green, and it has to have this little green screw. So everything looked really good. We attached this, got everything wire nutted. The problem is this wire is of inadequate size. These two wires are both grounding wires. They're bare. The one on the left is a number 12 wire. The one on the right is a number 10 wire. And because of the size of the wire going to the water heater, I believe it's a number 8 wire, we have to have a number 10 ground. And the pigtail that we purchased unwittingly is a number 12. So we've got to replace that with the proper size grounding wire. It's such a seemingly simple change, but it really makes sense that the grounding conductor needs to be appropriately sized for the wire. So we learned a very simple lesson in this box that'll serve us well going forward in any future metal boxes or anything else that we have to attach a pigtail ground to. In case you're wondering, yeah, we're getting really good at taking the water heater apart, but that's part of learning. We're just having to take it apart 57 times and get it right, which is part of why we wanted to go through this inspection and learn all this stuff so that hopefully in the future, we do a whole lot less taking things apart 57 times after they're put in. Sweet, the heater just turned off. I think this is a great time to jump into the panel and work on those GFI breakers. See, let's turn that off. Let's turn the laundry off, bathroom outlets, and heat, bath heat. All right, looking good. Are you updating? Crud, I think I just made a mistake. I think Alyssa's working on updating her computer, so she needs internet. So I guess we're gonna have to wait on these two breakers. That doggone internet, man. We all live on it, right? It's become as important as electricity and water. All right, triple double mistake. Turns out the internet is still off grid, so we're okay to turn that off. Not quite done. Wait, that's on the outlet. So I can't pump this because I turned the outlet on that's not on. All right, we gotta get these breakers done. Wow, that hurt. That's what's coming out and that's what's going in. Perfect. I guess we'll go higher with that one. Well, that's how simple it is to put a GFI breaker in. Basically power down or de-energize the main panel and then switch the breakers out. Pretty straightforward. The thing is, this panel went from about $200 in breakers to about $750 in breakers. And that's the difference between the GFIs and not. We had a great conversation with the inspector about the function of the GFI and why it's so important. If you think about it, if something were to fall on these bare wires, or you were to drop something or trip over them or something like that were to happen, these guys are there to protect you. They're very, very sensitive. And more importantly, they are there to protect the ground wire, the bare wire, this one that's just hanging out. We have a bare wire clear over in the corner that's hooked to the UFR ground. And if there were to become a short between this ground wire and the neutral wire, that big old bare wire over there could electrocute you because it would be carrying current. But that's not what it's there for. Well, it is there, but only in an absolute emergency. So thankfully, these are there to trip the breaker. They physically will trip the breaker if there's any short that is present. That's why it's so expensive. Even though in our situation, from what we understand, these are only required because we're homeowners, we're living in the house, and we're in construction. We're under construction. But I can kind of see, and maybe you guys agree, the wisdom of having these devices just in general. I guess there's two reasons you wouldn't want them. One, they definitely add to the cost. And if you're on a budget like most all of us, you're looking for ways to save. GFI outlets are expensive, so we try to minimize the need for them, meaning we put one maybe at the beginning of a string of outlets, and then every outlet after that, those are just regular outlets. That saves us cost. Well, I guess there's a wiring reason for that too, so don't chew on me too much for that. The other reason that they can be kind of a nuisance is that they're kind of sensitive. And I've been assured by both the electrician and the inspector that the technology in here is way better than it was even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, GFIs were more annoying than they were safe. They would have all kinds of false trips or false faults. They wouldn't want to reset. If you ever tested them, they became weak and all these other problems. So people have kind of tried to avoid them because they were a pain in the butt. But they've assured me that that has changed, and these devices now can be tripped and reset many times, and they're far more precise, so you're going to get a lot less false tripping. In general, they're easier to work with. So those are really the reasons you wouldn't want them. But from a safety perspective, whether we're under construction or not, I can actually see the benefit of having a GFI breaker in your panel. You guys recall we installed these lockouts. So why don't we need lockouts on these two devices? The simple answer is because they have a means of disconnect that can be used to de-energize whatever is connected to them. So this is the water heater, and you can't unplug the water heater. It's also out of line of sight, and it's more than 50 feet, or it's not more than 50 feet, but if it were, you would need a lockout. So because we can't unplug it, we have to have these lockout devices. I showed this in a previous video. This little lockout device goes over the breaker and allows you to add a padlock. In case you're wondering, yeah, they're super high tech. Add your padlock here and nobody can energize this device until you remove your padlock. This is the dryer and this is the range, and both of those can be unplugged. Are you ready to go turn the power back on? Are you? Huh? Do you want to help me? Here, let's go turn the power on. Okay, come on, ready, go. Totally fooled me. I thought he was going to help. Turns out he just abandoned me. We put a little bit of effort into trying to find a main breaker to install in the interior panel to save us the trip coming outside to de-energize the inside panel. What we found out is that the breaker, nobody really stocks the breaker. We've looked kind of high and low. They can order it, but it's a little hard to come by. And it's actually more expensive to buy the breaker than it is to buy the panel with the breaker in it. The problem is the panel with the breaker in it doesn't have the same guts. So then you have to switch the guts out, and that's a lot of work. Can you guys see where I'm going with this? It's a lot of work. We're hoping to get one of those breakers installed because down the road, it'd be a lot easier to flip the breaker inside, work on the panel, flip the breaker inside, and away you go. But it's also nice to have this disconnect outside in case firemen or other people need to come here and safely de-energize the building. If this will come back on, here we go. Almost done. Perfect. I'm glad this is happening, guys, because I wanted to explain to you how important it is that when we come in here and we turn these breakers on, they don't trip. But guess what? This one is tripping. And what that means is either the breaker's faulty, which is at this point I would say highly unlikely, but the more likely thing is that we have a fault between the neutral and the ground somewhere in this circuit, which is the range. Awesome. So now we got to figure out what the heck is going on and why this breaker won't turn on. So let's test this one. All right, so the dryer circuit works, and so does the test button. But we're out of luck on the range. Interesting. In a weird way, I'm kind of glad this is happening because it allows me to illustrate the importance of these GFI breakers. If we didn't have this breaker in here, I would have no way of knowing that apparently there's some sort of fault. And it's a ground fault. We know that. We don't know if it's on the neutral or on the hot. But either way, it's not good. So when you put these GFI breakers in here, even though it was just a simple switcheroo, if you go to turn them on and they won't reset, you've got a problem that you didn't know about until you put a GFI breaker in. This works out pretty good because I need to get into the RV or the range oven and work on the ground. So let's make sure that's powered off. Okay. I suppose it's good to communicate that the fault may not actually be in this circuit. It's possible the fault exists at this level, which is at the range. Why don't we try to turn that on and see if in fact the issue is the range itself, not the circuit. Ha! All right, so something is wired wrong on the range itself. There's nothing wrong with the circuit, so that makes me feel better. It does make me scratch my head because I'm the one that put the cord on the oven, and that's not good, I guess. So I need to pull that cover back off and do some research and figure out why or how I wired it wrong. Remember, we just talked about having the appropriate sized ground, which we made a mistake on at the water heater, but we got that correct here at the range. This is a number 10 ground on a number 10 ground, so all the wire sizing here is correct. Only we made another mistake that we kind of knew about, but I didn't realize was an issue at the outlet. The UL listing on this outlet only permits one wire in here. So I have the ground wire coming from the panel, and then I have a ground wire going out that is bonded to this box at that screw. Well, it doesn't work. That's not allowed. But there's a solution. Perfect. That's the answer. You can take this ground wire and loop it around that ground screw, and that meets the grounding requirements on these boxes. That little tip, I think, will be a huge asset for us as we start to install more metallic boxes. And we don't have to add an additional ground wire. Now we can just drop this into the outlet, and just like that, it's kind of cleaned up the box just a little bit. Perfect. That all looks really good. So I'm confused why we got red to red, white to white, black to black, and we've got the ground right there. So I'm really not sure if that's grounded. Why are we getting a fault? I don't know why, but I'm wondering if this little copper piece right here actually connects to like this metal in here, because if I remember right, this strap was kind of hung down here, but my thinking was that that's what connected this to that. So I guess the way to know would be to check for continuity between here and here, and if there is, something's connecting this to the chassis, and that's why we're getting the fault at the panel. I guess let's check this one more time. So yep, for sure, our range is, the whole outlet's fine. And let's go to resistance. That should work. And let's make sure it's working. There we go. So we're getting resistance there, so we've got a circuit. Although that should be more sensitive than that. There we go. So we're checking for a circuit from this ground here to this neutral. From this hot, So we're not showing any kind of circuit there, which is what I would have expected. And our meter's working. We're getting continuity. All right, it looks like there's a feature on this meter that can give us an audible if there's a circuit there. So we're good there, duh. We're good there, duh. Good there. Question is, are we good here? So there's no circuit there. So there is a circuit there. Is there a circuit from this hot? No. From this hot? No. From hot to neutral? From hot to hot? Weird. Alright, seems silly, but let's try just plugging this in. And we'll find out immediately because we'll hear the breaker pop. But let's go check it. Alright, will it reset? No. So something is still tripping that range, and it's inside the range. Guys, I think I figured it out. After testing the range for quite a while for continuity, I'm just bewildered, but I think I figured out what I did wrong. I think it has to do with this. So every one of these breakers that has a lockout on it only has two hots. This is a heater, water heater, because there is no neutral. But the dryer and the range have a neutral. And I totally forgot about that because I've been connecting so many that didn't have neutrals, I forgot to connect the load neutral. So the load neutral for this breaker is still hooked to the neutral bus. And the same is true for the dryer circuit. So I'm thinking, let's try that. I'm going to turn the power back off. We'll hook these neutral wires up and see if that will keep these breakers from flipping. Ooh, it's starting to freeze already. Wow. Nice, that's good and empty. Looks like I'm gonna have to jumper that one because I cut it short because I hooked it into that neutral bus. So this is gonna have to get jumpered into there. All right, let's give that a try. All right, range is plugged in. Ha! How about that? I can't even tell you in my mind right now why that neutral wire being there matters. Man, I need to stretch my brain some more. So, the reason we didn't have that problem with the dryer is because there was no cord plugged into it, therefore it never tripped. And I'm assuming that had we plugged our dryer in, then we would have tripped that breaker too. So the good news is we got our range back. I guess even though that's not at all what I thought, I totally was thinking that the issue was with how I wired the range, which after I got to looking at it didn't make any sense. But this really just reinforces what we've been saying about why this type of technology is nice to have. I think that was a simple mistake on my part. Had I really stopped and thought it through more carefully, I probably wouldn't have forgotten those neutral wires. But I'm glad that there's a device here that trips that breaker because it tells me something's not right. Like that's something's not connected the way it should be, even if it's maybe the range. Think about this for a minute. Let's say that you bought a range secondhand and somebody put a 4-prong cord on a range and they wired it like a 3-prong outlet would be wired. I'm just giving you a horrible scenario. This is going to trip because it knows something's not right. And I can be confident that somebody on Craigslist has done that before. Aside from the construction aspect, I think this makes a lot of sense, and I'm really glad that now all these breakers are resettable and everything's working the way it should be. No way. Alyssa's dad got a 3D printer And it looks like this is the first thing that he 3D printed was our backhoe. I see one small problem though. The exhaust stack is pointing toward the driver, so gonna need to do some slight modification, but it looks to me like there's some Hershey Kisses going on here, which I can totally approve of. Oh, look at that, a whole bucket full of them. Well, that does it for everything that we needed to correct following the inspection. We actually needed to get those GFIs installed before the inspection anyway. Of course, we got it done now, and getting those ground wires corrected. So that feels really good. And we're now at the point where we're okay to cover. What that means is we can conceal the wiring. What we've learned is that basically there's 2 times where you need to have an inspection where we are. One, before something is energized. So if you run a new circuit or you complete some wiring, the inspector wants to come out, take a look at it, make sure it's wired safely, correctly, meets code, and then he'll approve that new section. That's called a partial rough-in. And then in this case, there's going to be lots and lots and lots of partial rough-ins as we slowly add branch circuits and wire in new things in the house. So he wants to see that before it's energized. And assuming that's an area where we would need to cover the circuitry, let's say it's not in conduit, but it's hidden in the wall, then we are okay to cover it up. And that's where we're at. We wanted to get to that point because we want to start working on the cabinetry for the laundry area, and getting this approved for cover is something we wanted to achieve. We do want to share one thing about the permitting process and kind of the general attitude towards it. We feel like with this house, sure, it's a beautiful home. We're trying to build it as best we can. But the thing about any house you build is that you can't ever say we're going to live here forever. And we tried to communicate that in our videos, that this house is not all about us. And we see other people building houses that kind of take what we would call like the short-term approach. It's like, build it for today. But with this house, we're trying to think about tomorrow or next year or 50 years from now. And that's part of why the permitting process is so important. One, it gives a future owner or occupant of this house confidence that this house is built safely. But maybe more importantly, and we don't like this reality, but maybe more importantly, a bank is going to look at this and say, all right, we'll give you a loan because it's been built to code, it's been permitted, it's been inspected, and you're going to have a lot less issues getting financing for a house that's been through that process. A lot of homes in this area have not been permitted. People just don't pull permits. We can understand their reasoning, but in so doing, they're actually devaluing their property. So you build the same house minus the permits, minus the inspections, and it's going to be more difficult to find a buyer, especially if they intend to get financing, which is pretty much everybody. So that's part of why we're sharing so much of this process, especially the inspections, the permitting process, because we want to try to show what it's like to go through this, and I kind of articulate the experience so that maybe more people will see that the inspectors are not the bad guy and that building codes aren't evil, but really they're a tool and an asset to help you build a better home, a safer home, and in most cases, a more valuable home. Ooh. Alyssa's whipping up a mean dinner.